Today we go to the second part of the how to write a paper. As it turns out, I'm not sure we're going to finish today as a newcomer, a new part of the presentation. I decided to give you a concrete example of what it means. So the general idea here is that today, or in the first part of today, we finish the theoretical approach, and then we go through an example. So in the first part of this lecture, last time, I covered points 1 to 4. And just to sum up, the key point that I think you should have taken home from these 4 items is that when you write a paper, you have to make a lot of decisions. Given the results, the scientific results of the analysis, there are many ways you can translate them in the paper. There are many possible papers you can write, and sometimes even the same result can be translated in different papers. We call the process by which you take the results of the first part of the analysis into a paper synthesis. There are many ways of doing synthesis. Writing paper is definitely maybe the most effective, at least, or one of the most effective, at least from my point of view. So the first 4 items really say and describe the dimensions of the choices, or at least the most important that you have to make when you write a paper. So number 1 says, first of all, you need to decide the type of paper you want to write. Different papers have different purposes. Early result, final result, intermediate result, final result, a book summing up an entire area of research, and so on. Roll of papers. Analysis of audience. Audience. The audience really, by audience, really mean the invisible colleges. As I said, even for the same problem, there are, as you perceive it normally, there are many different perspectives. So we do a lot of data integration, we do a lot of sensor analysis. Data integration, do you deal with the problem of being more efficient in doing it? This could be something like getting into schema matching at the schema level, or how to automate the process of doing it, maybe by graph matching or machine learning, or the problem of minimizing mistakes. But that's one problem. Then you may have also deal with the issue of how do I do data integration with multiple languages? How do we do the data integration where in the health domain, they have a lot of peculiarity given to the domain? So data integration is not really a problem, it's really an entire area, right? And even when you do your research, since if you do an algorithm, if you do something, you have to touch on many different problems, most likely you touch into different aspects, right? It's not that if you do, in some cases, you can just do a very simple paper, not a simple paper, very focused paper, can be arbitrarily complicated, where you just concentrate on one aspect. These are typical, these days, machine learning and deep learning papers, a very specific aspect, like how to make the attention being very focused. But this some kind of the exception, at least in our group, which is when you really want to solve a problem to become something maybe closer to what is needed, then you have to touch upon different aspects. And when you write a paper, you just have to decide which aspect, how you choose. You choose on the audience, or vice versa. You choose the audience depending on what you have done. And this translation is really non-trivial. In particular, if it is the first time you publish in that audience, right? You have to learn. You have to learn how to do this. I said this already. So the kind of paper I already said, a roll of papers, and then defining goals. Now, defining goals, number 4, is really the key point. I mean, as I said last time, the paper has only one main goal, a single unique selling proposition, like your research. You have to be very clear about that, and you have to start from that. Once you have that, then you can prosecute and move on. Of course, coming up with a goal is not easy at all. This is exactly where your advisor may be useful. But the way to do it is just to try the best one you can do. And then you try to write the paper. And then ultimately, you will decide, or you find out, or not even decide, whether your choice was correct. And usually, this is an iterative process. We see that later, where you keep refining until you realize that you can write the paper. Sometimes you try to write a paper for a journal, and then you say, no, I don't have the results. Maybe let's go to a conference or to a less pretentious paper conference, right? So these are defining goals is a very key point in our research. And I think I already said that last time, but I want to repeat this as a crucial step. The research is never ending, it's never ending. So if you wait, some students of mine, they're really very precise. They will say, I don't write a paper until I understand everything. Understanding everything is impossible, right? So when you say to write a paper, it's not so much a function of whether you have finished it or not, or whether the gap between what was at the beginning and the paper is substantial. And depending on how substantial and complete it is, depends the level of publication you make. So these defining goals is really the key part of the first operational key step in when you approach the moment of writing a paper. Okay, so now we are there, and now we become operational. You see, 5 and 6 is really the key aspect. Usually, when I talk to you, I tell you, please do a coarse-grained structure of the paper. And then I tell you, do a fine-grained structure of the papers. So these are the key parts. And then now I'm going to make precise what I mean. And then in the example today or next time, depending on how fast you go, we just give an example. I just take a ready written paper and I'll show you which parts are like fine-grained and which parts are coarse-grained. And then the process, which you're going to be kind of finalizing the presentation. Okay. As I said, always when you start writing the paper, first define your goal. You have to have some vague idea, as vague, as precise as possible. And then you do in 2 steps. First, you do a coarse-grained argumentation, and then a fine-grained argumentation. Because, let me just be clear, a paper is an argumentation within a beginning and an end. Writing paper is like writing a theorem. It's like writing a piece of program. You have to have a full organization of your contents. So not that some of you at the beginning, they just start writing the paper, writing the introduction. No, of course not. Or writing something else. It's not, even if the paper is read sequentially, it's not written sequentially. Because you really have to, it's like putting together a big puzzle. And now I'm going to just describe to you how to put together this big puzzle. So first of all, this is a kind of idea of how you go. And so if you see the structuring paper, this is kind of the consequence, the sequence, I'm sorry. So, so number 1, you write a tentative title. Notice that the tentative title is the title is number 1 and number 5, at least, and there may be refinements in between, which is since the title is the core message of the paper, the choice of the right title is crucial. And by the way, let me just say that the choice of the title is again community dependent. For instance, in our domain, if you look papers like in KR, knowledge representation, like where I come from mainly, so titles tend to be short. But if you go to ACI or UbiComp, yes, sometimes titles are 2 lines long. So right or wrong, there's no right or wrong. It's just every community at their own style, right? This is exactly why it's very important when I tell you all the time, read the other papers, see how they won the papers. So this is number one. And then after that, you write your main idea. Usually your main idea is anything which is between session 2 and the last session, which are the conclusions, right? And can be iterative. And of course, sometimes, for instance, I do what I write in the introduction. I write a set of bullet points to make sure that you have the argument, right? But writing some bullet points in the introduction is like refining the title, right? And I'll tell you how. And then you do the conclusions. Usually writing the conclusion to me takes more than 20 minutes. I just say something. I've written the introduction. So when you write it, I'll tell that later, but what is the goal? You have a robust title, you have a robust introduction, you have a robust argumentation, and then in the conclusion say, okay, in the introduction I promised to do this, I did this, and sometimes at the sentence, in the future I will do this, but the future work is not needed, okay? Then you finalize the title, then you write the abstract. The abstract is really crucial, fundamental. And so now what we are going to discuss, I mean, like you see, this is the order. I'm going to first discuss how to write the title, how to write the abstract, and then introduction, and then main idea, conclusions, and so on. Okay, good. So these are the key. So this is how a paper is going to be. Right. So this is a sequential presentation of a paper. Right. Title, abstract, introduction, workup to the main idea, details of the main idea, conclusion, appendixes, right? Now, notice that session 4 and 5, right? So somewhere in the paper, always, you have to give the big picture, right? So I told you last time, if you want to write one paper, one message, right? Say, my paper is about cooking tomato sauce. Then I want to talk about the garlic, the tomato, and the oil. This garlic, tomato, and oil could be part of the details, one session each. But in session number 4, I need to tell you that whatever I write down is a detailed description of what I'm going to say in number 4, right? So this is why very often we use session number 4. Let me write the number 4 could be like a motivating example, problem, I mean, the main idea, the main algorithm, and so on. Is really kind of the overall picture. As we see in the example, some of you don't write the main picture. So what happens if you don't write the main picture? What happens if you don't have the session or somewhere they work out on the main idea, item 4, right? Happens that you have the main idea, but the reader does not have the main idea. And you're asking the reader to get the main idea out of 3 or 4 sections. And of course, the reader will not get the main idea. The main idea must be written very clearly. And for sure, it must be announced in the introduction, right? And it's going to be exactly the problem and solution. Then it might be 2 cases. Either that area is very mature, so people know it, and with a couple of citations in the state of the art, only the related work, you just make it very clear what you're doing. This is for like more incremental work where you're working something mainstream. Or if you're doing something which is not exactly mainstream, you may have to dedicate to 1 session, okay? But this is anyhow the general flow, right? Appendixes. Now, what do you put in appendixes? And in another way, what do you put in footnotes? How do you decide something is a footnote? Do you have any suggestions? You see, you have to have a methodology. It's not that you're coming here and you're reinventing the wheel. There is no wheel to reinvent. And if you reinvent the wheel, you get rejected. So there is a very strong transition. You have to learn the rules. So usually the rule for an appendix and then the footnote is that a footnote and appendix must be such that even if you don't read them, the paper is still understandable. But if you read them, you get the details. So for instance, if you write something theoretical, right? If you write, think like on theorems, right? The proof of the theorems go in the main body or go in the appendixes. If you publish in the Journal of Symbolic Logic, for sure we go on the main body, because they are not interested in the technique. And most likely those proofs are not easy, right? If you write a paper in KR, well, you may just either put a hint of the proof, you can put in the appendix. Usually don't put, or you can put in the body if you really want to give a lot of emphasis to them. So the bottom line here is, if I give you theorems, is understanding the full detail of the problem, the full details of my proposed solution, is the details of the proof needed and useful for you to understand the main message of the paper? This is a question you need to ask, right? Okay, now, again, I told you that one paper, one message. So I think the key part to understand that title, abstract, introduction, and conclusions are meta sections, are not are sections about to the other sections. Okay, so, and they have a specific purpose, right? So they really say they have different purposes, and they really say the same thing at different levels of detail, right? So one important message is that you should minimize as much as possible the amount of content in the introduction, right? It is okay for the introduction to repeat one sentence from the abstract, and it's okay for an introduction to announce results without saying them, as long as you know how to write it, okay? So these are the meta talks, the meta sessions, which really have the purpose of really making the bulk, the core of the paper, which are the central sessions, understood by the user, getting the user ready for that, okay? So let us start. Oh, too bad it's not the right. So, okay. So first of all, before looking, let's start from the abstract, right? Too bad there is no navigation in this presentation. What is the goal of the abstract? So the first question, when you write an abstract, when you write a title even, what is that? Let me start from the title. I think the next one is the title, right? When you write a title, what is the goal of the title? Think how it works now. In my old days, you had to go in the library and look in the library. But now, where you go? You go to Google Scholar, you go to Scholar One, you go to all these kind of, you go to ResearchGate. What you do? You do a search by keywords, right? So the goal of the title is to make sure that when people look for the state of the art, they find you. Number one. Number two, you do know that you do not have much time, you as a writer, to convince the reader. Let me just put a little open parenthesis here. I didn't say that, but let me repeat. The common mistake that all of you make, that you think what you want to write, as I said no later than yesterday, what you want to write is irrelevant. What is matter is what the reader reads and understands, right? So when you write the abstract, you don't think, or you write the title, you do not think of what you want to say. You think of what the reader will read, and you think about how you can maximize the probability that the reader will find your title interesting, right? And you do know that you have no more like 2 or 3 seconds for the reader to make this decision. How much time do you spend in deciding whether a title is worthwhile? Now, what is a title? As I said, in my community, it's 5 words. In other communities, longer. But what is the goal of the abstract? What is the goal? If you think functionally, what is the purpose of the title? It's to convince the reader to read the abstract. Nothing more, right? Is to sell the unique selling proposition. Is to really make sure that not only the reader will go down and read the abstract, and then later on to remember your paper, right? Okay, so now you write the title. How do you decide what to put in the title? How do you maximize the probability that the reader will actually, first of all, find your paper, by search, because these days it's longer than this, and then we find the paper interesting. Oh, it's very simple. I mean, all our life is a problem and solution, right? There's nothing else, right? All research is by problem and solution. And sometimes the domain, right? And if you see, in order to go, what I suggest, go back and read, or go back. This homework for you. Go to the last 10 papers you read, you read, and look at it. Look at the titles and try to identify what those titles say. I assume you know the contents, and you think that they will have some composition of problem, solution, and domain. Why domain? Because in certain applications like health or like smart city is very important. Why the domain becomes important? Because sometimes the domain is so compelling, so strict, that changes even the meaning of the problem statement and the solution statement, okay? So usually what people can do, for instance, this is an example of a paper, data coordination in peer-to-peer database. The problem is what? We have a problem in peer-to-peer databases, and then the solution, we want to do data coordination, which is semantic matching, all right? This is one example. So how do you come with that? First of all, it comes with experience, right? And then you have just to train yourself. Writing titles, like doing everything which is short, is something which requires a lot of expertise. It's much easier to write 10 lines than writing 1 line. But this is something that a famous professor taught me many years ago. He told me we had to write a paper together. It was Bruno Bruckberger, actually the one who taught me how to teach this class many years ago. And he said, it's very simple. He said, okay, we need to write a paper. And it was very methodological. And he said, okay, what do you do? He took a piece of paper, an A4 paper, and he drew 3 columns, right? Problem, solution, domain. And he said, now start writing all the words, or the possible different words you can use for the problem. Start writing it, in an A4, right? And then you navigate, and you choose. Right now, I don't do that anymore, but for a long time was helping me because it gives you the space. And then ultimately, not by this that you find the final title, but it is how you make sure that you cover the space of the possible titles, right? And in fact, ultimately, these are the titles combination of these words. Clearly, and by the way, they do not need to be all present, right? Sometimes, if the domain is very mature, you don't need a problem statement, right? Instead, if an area is very immature, very young, then you need maybe just only the problem statement, like dealing with the mislabeling problem, right? Dealing with the paper that I'm going to show you right with 1E. Well, I mean, the problem was rather well known, but not many solutions, so the problem was good enough. Just the fact that we were dealing with that problem was good enough, okay? So, okay, so this is the key idea of the title. Okay, now we have done the following, and now we do the abstract. Remember that you write the abstract at the end and not at the beginning, right? So what is the goal of the abstract? Suggestions? The goal of the abstract is to convince the people to read the introduction. When you got the reader to read the abstract, you know that instead of having 2 seconds, now you have around 20 seconds, right? So basically, what is going to be the abstract? The abstract is going to be pretty much the same message as the title, expanded, giving a lot of some meat. 10 lines, 20 lines, up to you. And I think the key point here is that you really have to come up with the key messages. You really have to say, this is what is key. If I'm building a data set, what is new in this data set? If I'm modeling, if I'm doing habits, why is context useful? What is new? What is the key idea, right? And then the key idea is going to be like problem, solution, and sometimes optional validation. But while in the title, you only announce it with 2 or 3 words, in the abstract to give some more details. And this is exactly why the abstract must be written at the end and not at the beginning. Because only at the end, when you finish the paper, that you have an idea of what you want to say. what you are able to say, more than what you want to say that you're actually able to say. All right, so the key point, so it is the name of the problem to be solved, the data domain solution, what is new, the key aspect, what is new. The main contributions that you can also be in the introduction. Now, one thing is that a common mistake, you never put citations in an abstract. Why so? Because an abstract must be self-contained. If you have only 20 seconds or 10 seconds to convince the reader to read the paper, a citation is meaningless. It's just a number, doesn't say anything. Okay? Citations may go, usually go, sometimes go in the introduction, but for sure not in the abstract. In the abstract, you just expand the main message of the introduction, getting the person ready for what? For reading the introduction. Now, what is the objective of the introduction? To convince the reader to read the paper, right? So it's like peeling an onion, right? One step at a time. But each time, you have to become more convincing. How you do it? By providing more details. But clearly, the introduction must be readable and understandable by the reader in the reader terms. Once I've chosen the community, once I've chosen, made all the decisions that we decided before. So the introduction is really, the item is a last session you have to prepare the reader, right? So at the end of the introduction, you must have the reader all set up of what you want to describe. I think personally, I believe that's what is true for me. I mean, like 65% of the probability of being accepted is in the introduction. Why? Because the introduction is just how you filter out. I mean, like if you see that it's not convincing, if you see that the introduction is not well written, if you see that the contribution is incremental, you just, even if you go on in the paper, you just had all the mindset. Oh, so this guy is doing a lot of mistakes in English, so I don't see the point. Oh yes, this work seems to be very well known. Then you have also the related work at the end to convince someone that is going to tell you that you're not doing enough contributions. But all these issues come in. Is really so once you succeed in getting the reader to read the introduction, then in the introduction you have to put a lot of effort. Introduction must be very well written. This is they are the key of the paper. So this is why you may want to write a bullet point introduction at the beginning to make sure that you have the argument. But this is why you write the introduction just before the abstract, after the conclusion. The conclusion, I think, that plays 1% in the acceptance of the paper. The conclusion, I mean, when you go to the conclusion, either the user has understood or I mean, the conclusion doesn't have much to say. But the introduction is really key. So writing a good introduction is fundamental. And again, the introduction is fundamental that you write it in the terms of the reader. You must convince the reader, not only you must help the reader understand what is in the paper, but you must also convince him, right? And then, of course, exactly why structuring papers, in the structure of the paper, the introduction is pretty much what they suggest is give a standard reference. By the way, I'm not meaning in any sense that this is the final index. But let me go through the index of the introduction, and then I'll go back to discussing this. So first of all, let me notice that I'm saying that in introduction, even if it is a section without subsessions, it does have subsessions, even if they are called paragraphs. But paragraphs are implicit subsessions in what you write, right? So what I'm saying that the structure, the fine-grained structure of the introduction is pretty much fixed. And how you do this? First, you write the context, one paragraph, no citations, yes citation, may have citations. Problem plus citations for sure. Approach plus solutions plus citations. Why your novel? Sometimes now these days I put the main novelties are structure the paper, and maybe sometimes them observations at the end. So what I'm saying is that he say in item 2 and 3 is really where you have to have citations. Of course, in the problem, the solution, then you're going to argue this better in the related work session or state-of-the-art session. But now, since you have one page and a half, since you now really need to convince the reader, you have to make sure that you have citation, or at least that you know how to have citation. So usually the citation that you put in the introduction are the core citations. They are not all the citations. Just put the citations which are core to the main message of the paper. Always, we see that in the next presentation of today, when I go through the paper, always the related work is divided in argument, of course. Always to do related to different areas. But for sure, there is one area which is core. And for sure, in the related work section, the first paragraph is on the core citations, which allow the reader to position what you're doing in that area, okay? I'm saying 20 lines just to give with a page of like with an introduction of one page. It could be 30 lines, could be whatever you want, up to you. Again, it's a matter of style. But what is interesting is that when I ask people to write paper, like young people like you, all of you, the first paper you write, this introduction is not good enough. You just come with something else. Why? Because you have such a wonderful idea. You have just come, you have no idea how to do research, but you know how to write an introduction, which is, of course, you have no idea how to write, but you think you do. It's only when I tell you knowing that what you don't know, remember, and you just see when you apply methodology, you think you know, but you don't. You're right? So my suggestion here is that in the first 5 or 6 or 10 papers you write, you just follow this index. And if you fail, it's your problem. It's not the problem of the index. Once you have learned the process by which you streamline your ideas in the sub-index of the introduction, then you may hope, not be sure, that you have a vague idea how to write an introduction. But remember that writing an introduction is by far the hardest part of the paper. And let me just repeat, in my experience, there are two things. Number one, you just write some random introduction because you have such a wonderful idea. It's very clear that your idea cannot be written in this introduction because it's so new, so wonderful. And then number two, you just write your own index because, of course, your paper is so unique. And then you just come up with the new geniuses of the research, like 2,000 years of research mean nothing. You come up with the new ideas. Or this is exactly what you have to learn how to defeat. This means exactly to know what you don't know. Because once you've learned the job, then you can go your own way. But first, you have to absorb this experience of so many people doing the research, okay? This to say that I told you this, I'm curious to say when you're gonna write the papers the next month, how many of you will come up with your index and you'll explain to me why you're so right in doing something different from what people do in the mainstream. When you do that, actually, you come to the hard work, and the key point is really remember there's nothing new, right? We have like compared to what I said before, there's problem solution, problem state of the art, solution validation. All of this must be put inside here, right? What is the key difference? Some of you, I asked you to give a problem and solution for your general research, right? When you describe like in a qualifying, your general research, you can be much more vague, because you're just starting. When you write a qualifying, or when you do a general presentation, as some of you are gonna give, you're just at the beginning. So just it cannot be too vague, but you have to sense the direction. When you come here and you want to get the paper right, and you want to get the paper published, you really have to get into the details. You really have to get it right. The problem statement must be very precise, and the validation must clearly show that the solution solves the problem. namely that the solution is in fact a solution. So some of you is interesting, they just write problem, solution, and validation, and you don't connect. You do like a text experiment. I have these research questions down here, but these research questions, if they are not connected explicitly to the problem statement, the solution statement, you just think of the point of the reader, like the reader that expects something and then get something else. If you think of yourself, try to analyze yourself when you read the paper of someone else, which is exactly what I'm going to ask you with your colleagues' papers, right? When you read something, then you have expectations. If the writer is a good writer, create expectations in your mind. And you must create expectations first, and then you must fulfill these expectations. And if what the reader expects is different from what you tell the reader, the probability that the reader will not understand what you're saying is very high. And by the way, again, I'm not saying that this is easy. I make these mistakes all the time, right? It's just something whether that you have to be very much in control. So this, I just here I was assuming like a 15-page paper. This is really the key part of the paper, right? So for sometimes I read, you have like 15-page paper, and there are 3 pages of introduction, 2 pages of related work. So suppose you have a 15-page paper, right? The new stuff, this should start in the 15-page, no later than page 3. You can't go to page 5 and go all the way to page 5. You don't know yet what the main results are. And still, I saw some papers like this. Okay. So how you structure papers? As I said, like structuring papers, like in the final part, then there is the related work. Now, the related work, when I was younger, most of it in my community was always at the end. Now I notice that it's much more at the beginning. It's become more state-of-the-art. Right or wrong? No, there's no right or wrong as usual, as long as you can do whatever, as long as you're convincing. Now, the key point, however, is that, again, whether you do state-of-the-art or do related work is very much community dependent, right? There are very few communities which allow related work and state-of-the-art in both in their papers. Usually, most communities settle on one. By the way, sometimes I saw a lot of papers they call related work at the beginning, which I think is awful, because at the beginning you cannot do the related work, because the related is work which is related to your work. And so if your session is session number 2, I don't see how in session number 2 you can do relation to your work when you have not yet described your own work. So pretty much I think it's a contradiction in terms. But what is the key difference? The key difference is that if you write the related work at the end, you have the related work to your work. So the related work must be different, written different from the state-of-the-art. Why? Because in the related work you say, I've done, these people have done this. You know what I've done because you read my sessions before, and then I can tell you that I'm better in this and this. And you have to say what you're better. Right? You're better, right? And of course, the paper will be accepted to the extent that you're able to understand. You're able to make the reader understand that where you're better and why where you're better is meaningful, right? In the state-of-the-art, if you're state-of-the-art usually is session number 2. You have just announced your big plan, but the reader does not know what you've written, right? So you can't really do the related work, right? No matter whether you call the session related work. What you can say, look, people have done this. And since I told you in the introduction that I want to do this, you should be able to understand that what I'm telling you that they have done is relevant for me, right? But then this means that in the state-of-the-art at the beginning, you don't do the one-to-one comparison with you, but you just do the state-of-the-art on the overall paper, okay? But this means that when you write a paper with the state-of-the-art, is slightly different from writing a paper with the related work. And this is why I like the related work at the end. Why? Because if you do the related work at the end, during the main body, you don't need to compare with the other work, right? Why? If you do the state-of-the-art, while you write the state-of-the-art, and then you go to the different sections, then you have to continuously compare, right? However, the related work approach as a disadvantage. Why? Because if you did not do the state-of-the-art at the beginning, then people may find it hard to position your paper. One of the main reasons why I get paper rejected is because I fail to position. So the state-of-the-art in this sense makes it easier to position your work, because by declaring what is your state-of-the-art, you just clearly, you just set the mind of the person, this perspective, right? So if you do the state-of-the-art, the reader will understand where you're going. Of course, then it's up to you. We'll have harder work later on to describe what you're new, because you have to do it in the main body of the description, right? While with the related work, you can do at the end, you can really do the detailed comparison, but you may end up with a reader that has no idea what you're doing until page 14 or 15, right? So this is why when you do the related work, which I like the most, then this is why in this case, why citation, the introduction become most important. Why? Because since I have related work at the end, and therefore I do not have the state-of-the-art for me to help you set in your mind, then the only thing I can do is to use the introduction to position myself. So in this case, when you have the state-of-the-art, most likely, I think it's a good idea to have a slightly longer problem solution statement. You go to 29 to 30 lines, so even have 2 paragraphs, because you really need to make sure, but that the end of the introduction or the end of the state-of-the-art, the reader knows where you are, where you're going. Otherwise, the reader, he will not understand, and you're lost and you get the rejection. And notice that sometimes you just get it wrong, which is you think you're positioning yourself, but you don't. And this is exactly why sometimes getting rejection, actually most of the time, getting rejections is good. It's a pain, it's not right, but if you get good rejections, as happens, where we say with more than 50% of the cases, or with like 60, 70% of the cases, the paper rejection is part of life. Of course, when you're a PhD, you don't want to have too many of them. My age, I think you're more robust, you get so many of them. But I think so anyhow, the goal here is really, I mean, like going back to the related work, and then the conclusion is what I said. But I think that while the related work and state-of-the-art are crucial, conclusion and future work play no role. The only way, personally, in my own opinion, then of course each of us has his own taste. I'm not pretending to teach how to do things. As I said, since doing research is learning how to think, I cannot teach how to learn how to think, because each of you have to learn how to think your own way. But at least I can give an example, and at least I can give you, I think the goal here is really to avoid you reinventing the wheel. There is so much infrastructure and technology in how to do research. Thousands and millions of top people worldwide have done this in many years. And this is why the PhD is hard. This is why the first year is hard, because when you come, you have no idea. And this is exactly why PhD is not the master's. You need to do all of this, so that, assuming that you have anything to say, assuming that your research is good, you have to learn how to describe it and to provide it. And this is exactly what the PhD is all about. The PhD is all about teaching how to do this, because as I said already last time, when you do the PhD, the probability that you do something else different is very high. But if you learn the methodology, research methodology, then most likely you will be much more ready to do the research than before starting the PhD. Now, right, the key, the related work again is for each system, for each thing, you have to have, like, you go by paragraph, by arguments. I'll give you an example, right? It's not that related work you just write randomly. No, first paragraph, the research is more directly relevant to you with 3 or 4 or 5 citations that are relevant. The second most relevant, and then whatever, and then in the last part, you decide pretty much what you want, because just a matter of positioning. And if you do the related work, as I said, you are going to do better. If you do the state-of-the-art, you write. You do the state-of-the-art, you don't argue why you do better, because you can't, because I'm not even in the paper yet. But you write in a way so that when later on you write the paper, you're ready to link. So when you write a related work with the state-of-the-art, it's not only an issue of what you select to cite, but how you cite. And it's fundamental. Appendixes, already said, is material which is not necessary but useful. Okay, nothing more to say. Usually, I put appendixes in journal papers, footnotes 1 or 2. The usual best footnote is the acknowledgement to the funding agency that either you put at the end, if you have space, as an acknowledgement section, so you put as a subtitle to the, as a footnote to the title. Okay, so the appendixes and the references. The references just evolve with the paper, right? And usually the way you do this is that you have a bunch of references that you put in the body of the paper, but remember that the reference in the body of the paper are no substitute for the reference in the related work. The reference in the main body of the paper are not to do the related work, are only to explain what you're doing. So if you want to say something and you want to say something, you just say, this key idea is this, read this for the details, right? So usually the citation, the name of the paper may be completely different, not usually. Let me just say it in another way. The references that you have in the body of the paper is not related work, it's only to help the reader understand. Why the related work of state of the art is all about positioning your work. So the two types of references are not one substitute to the other, and most of the time they are really largely disjoint. And also a key point about citations in particular, which I want to say, because the most important appendix is the citations, right? The references. You cite when you introduce a new notion, you explain the notion the first time you introduce it. If you use some kind of short text for whatever, like you have to explain there. If you introduce a notion, you just cite the first notion, and you don't keep citing. You cite only once. There is an issue of minimality in a paper. You can't cite for any micro. It's not correct. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but you have to be very careful in citing on the first time you introduce a notion. And you should avoid repeating too many citations in the body. Wow, okay, good. So now we move into this is the coarse grain, the coarse grain structure of the papers. And this is what I told you in terms of writing the organizing the structure of the papers and out the general idea to each session. Now to the fine-grained structure of the papers. So the concept is very simple, by the one where most of you fail. So pretty much, if you think what is said about the coarse grain structure of the paper, pretty much the coarse grain structure of the paper is what? A tentative title, some kind of rough organization of the introduction, the title of the session and subsessions, what it is. And this is exactly why when I talk to you, a lot of time I give you a tentative title and the tentative index, because I'm helping you, because it's one of the hard parts to build, okay? And there, let me just say, we said that in the next presentation, because I found out now that I need another lecture on the example next time, is that when you do the coarse grain structure of the paper, the words you use in the title, the words you use in the sessions are fundamental. And whether you have a session at level 1 or a subsession at level 2 or the subsession at level 3, it's fundamental. Level 3, it's fundamental. It's not that you have a choice. If you have a title of a subsession level 2, it's clearly much less important than a title of a session level 1, right? So when you think of the title of the session, the subsession in the coarse grain structure, you have to be very careful. Because some of you, they just write one session and say solution. And then they say 3.1 phase 1, 3.2 phase 2, whatever. But this means that what is actually your main contribution, which is a solution, goes to level 2. Which means that if you put your main component solution at level 2, this means that you're playing down your results. You understand? So when I give you the index, I really think, first of all, the index are the same because you have to do problem and solution as usual. But you need to decide, this is exactly the magic when you have to write papers, what are the right titles at the right level of structure, level 1, level 2, level 3. To me, actually, level 3 is not coarse-grained structure of the paper. Level 1 and level 2 might be, in particular when some parts. But you have to be very careful. The choice of the words in the titles of the sections and the choice of the level is fundamental. It's really fundamental. And by the way, I already told you many times, we do all of this for the reader. But let me just tell you that this trick of the reader is actually an excuse for yourself to stop saying, I want to say this, I want to say this. All of you come to me and say, I want to say this, I want to say this. It's irrelevant. Because why is that bad? Because if you want to say something, you have your own idea in mind. You want to say something after 2 years of work. You have no idea what a reader who has never done any work for 2 years on this idea, right? So want to listen. So this idea of doing all this exercise I'm giving you in writing the paper is all about detaching you from yourself. It's all about forcing you to analyze critically what you've done. It's all about you making an effort to explain what you've done. And the major effect, as you find out once you get some practice, by explaining to the others, is like teaching, you learn yourself. As I usually say, there's nothing better than learning than teaching, because many times in my life, you're there teaching something, and you realize that you didn't really understand, so you get stuck, right? So this is really important. Now you do all of these, and these are the coarse-grained structure of the paper. Now you go to the fine-grained structure of the paper. What is the fine-grained structure of the paper? Is the structure of the single sections, because right now I told you the sections that pretty much this over structure, because you have to have the argumentation, right? The scientific argumentation. You remember I said at the beginning, scientific results must be replicable, right? How does it mean replicability? Replicability means that people must be able to do what you did. They must be able to evaluate what you've done, redo the evaluation. They must be able to replicate the same problem statement. It's all problem and solution replicable. Okay, so this is exactly what to write the coarse-grained structure of the paper. And the fine-grained structure of the paper is the same. It's not that you go one level down. It's the same. So what is the key idea? And as I said, the fine-grained structure of the paper is where all of you fail. And usually just write me a couple of sentences in natural language. In the same way, you got the structure right at the first level, at the coarse-grained, then you have to do the same one level down, right? And here, what is the unit of planning here? The unit of planning is a paragraph. So, for instance, some of you go create a new line more or less randomly. We have no idea. No, a new line means that you're starting a new argument. Are you following me? So, the fine-grained structure of a section is the number of paragraphs. The number of paragraphs. And when you have a new line, you start in a new argument. Clearly must follow from the previous argument. It is a new argument. You're changing topic. Okay? Not only that, suppose that you now write, some of you just write paragraph of 2 lines. So you have like a section or like 22-line paragraphs, 1 page, 22-line paragraphs. It's meaningless. It's like meaning that the new line means nothing. Are you following me? Now, suppose vice versa. Some of you, I read papers, you have 1 paragraph, 1 page. Now, think psychologically. Anytime you read the paper, you have an entire page with a new line, with a new line. You say, wow. I mean, usually what I do, I try to read somewhere in between to guess, because I really get discouraged when I start. I really just pisses me off. Not that pisses me off, I get discouraged. I really. So what is the right way? The right way is that you get the right length. What is the right length? To me, it's like 20 lines. You see it. I mean, I can do it. I mean, right? I mean, you read it. I can do it. One paragraph, 1 message. You're gonna tell me the key idea, and then and then you go and you argue. Okay, I go to the second part of the page, like one page, 4 paragraphs, 4 ideas. Okay, one piece at a time. Like when you walk, right? You have to walk for 1 hour. You say something, tell me the result is the same. They're not likely the same. I mean, you just do the same. Okay. So this is why a lot of time we spend a lot of time setting up the length of the paragraphs. It's fundamental. It's actually more fundamental than writing the coarse-grained structure of the paper, because the coarse-grained structure of the paper is easy. When you get to the fine-grained structure of the paper, is when the hard part begins. Because you see, when I told you the coarse-grained structure of the paper, I thought there is an introduction, there is an include. I even gave you the structure of the introduction. But when you get here, you're in open space. This is you. Either you're clear what you're doing, or you just write randomness, or you just write something that the reader will never understand. Are you following? So my suggestion here, like 6 is too much. I would say like if there are like 20 lines, 30 lines, doesn't matter, of course, because it's not like it's always complicated. There are always exceptions. But I mean, the length of the paragraph is fundamental. Not only that, right? In one section, paragraph must be homogeneous, right? Oh, this homogeneity is a very important point. Some of you make sections of 1 page, another sections of 10 pages, in another section of 4 lines. That to me makes no sense. Because you see, length is meaning. If you ask me, if you give me a page of a section of 5 pages, or a paragraph of 20 lines, or a paragraph of 50 lines, this must mean that this paragraph is more important than paragraph of 20 lines. I mean, you spend more time. I mean, you have a limited space when you write the paper, right? You have just your resources, you're under limited resources. So you must plan your idea. So you must make me understand. So if you give more space to a section or to a paragraph, then there must be a reason. So this is why I say that the flexibility in the length of paragraphs to me is close to 0. I mean, plus or minus 5 lines. But if you have a paragraph which is too long, this to me immediately means if anytime and I write a paragraph which is too long, I think that I didn't understand how to split it. It's not that it was like this, it's just me not understanding, okay? Right? When you tell me, when you have like a subsection, even a subsection on 20 lines, then my question here is that really a subsection? Or you just usually do like 4 subsections because you know what to write in the first 2. Maybe you're a little less about the third, and then the fourth you have nothing to say, and then you have this 4th subsection of 5 lines. Where when you're in such a subsection, maybe we should delete that subsection. Maybe you could say, maybe at the beginning of the session, there is also this issue, but it is easy, so I'm not covering it. Are you following what I'm saying? But if you have sessions which are too short, you should really consider deleting them. Deleting them means you don't talk about that part, you put a footnote, you say you don't deal with that part, or you just absorb it in another section. I mean, if you have a section or a subsection of 10 lines, what does that really mean? That you have nothing to say. So either you make that 10 lines on 1 page, or you have nothing to say. But then if you have nothing to say, why are you putting a section? Why are you making me waste the time in reading one subsection with nothing to say? Most likely, this could be a paragraph in another section, or it could be a paragraph somewhere else, but it's clearly not a subsection. So this issue of length is fundamental. And by the way, let me say, it's not that when I write, I think by now, maybe I'm not a great writer, but I think I have some expertise in writing papers. But when I write papers, it's not that the first time I write a paper, English is perfect, length is perfect. No, of course. The process of writing the papers is a process of refining your ideas. And the main message I'm giving you, that this syntactic argumentation that I'm giving you, like length of paragraphs, title of the session, subsessions, is what I use myself to force myself to elucidate what I want to say I'm not able to say. Remember what I told you 3 lectures ago. If anytime I say, I know that I don't know how to say something, I'm very clear that this means I don't understand the problem. This is for you and for me. So anytime you come to me and I tell you, split this subsession, it's 5 lines, 20 lines too short, and then you tell me it must be like this, then very clear to me that you did not understand, right? Because it can't be the case that something important in a scientific paper can be said in 10 lines. So important to be a first level section. Not only that, in one section overall, the paragraph must be homogeneous, not only in the length, but in the way you write. For instance, the way I write paragraphs, usually I try to write the first line of the paragraph, giving the main message, so that they give the reader immediately, and then an argument. So the same technique that I use in the sessions, I use also the paragraph level. And why so? Because when the reader, all of us, we have all our style. None of us is the same, right? It's not that you can write like me. You can absorb something from me, and most likely at the beginning, I suggest you do exactly like me as an example. But you can be sure that enough time you go your own way, correctly so. But I think that to emulate someone maybe has more experience is a good way to start. As it says, Google says, we stand on the shoulders of the giants, right? So my idea always is like in a paragraph at the beginning, you give the main message and you refine. Like let's say in the session, first I give the main message and I put the observations at the end. Why? Because observations are complementary results. But this is my own style. Look at my papers, you find the observation most of the time at the end. This is my own style. You like it? Maybe use it. Don't like it? You do something else. Of course, in the early days, you want to be sure that what you're going to do most likely is just wrong. Wrong, I mean not nice, not wrong in the sense of being nice. So all this way of thinking is a very good way for you to force yourself into the methodology. Because once you've learned, right? Okay? So initially, this is why I'm saying at the beginning, you need to spend a lot of time in writing paper. Take like when you go to the gym, right? You really have to practice. You have to fail and succeed. One last point is my own style, which I think is correct. I like a lot itemize and enumerate bullet points. Right? So anytime I can, I enumerate. So there are two cases. Something is not important, in which case I don't enumerate. Maybe I have a list, but it's not important. But as long as it is important enough, I enumerate. What is the effect of enumerating and putting itemize? The effect is that if you open a page with the one enumeration, the reader says, oh, at least me, oh, good, I have some structure, so I can distinguish. Like one page, you don't even remember after a while where you are. I mean, you lose track, right? Not only number one, but when you give enumerate, you really give importance. So if you want to give importance to something, use enumeration, use itemize. And using numbers is different from using dashes, because in numbers, if you use numbers, the order is important. It's not that you use numbers and then you just choose whatever you want. Use numbers, this means that there is an ordering. Otherwise, do bullet points or dashes. You understand, right, what I'm saying? And this is very fundamental. And there is another mistake that you do, is that sometimes, so you want to say that something is split in 5 parts. What you do, you just like one paragraph. You read to the one session. You write the entire paragraph, and then one paragraph for phase 1, one paragraph for phase 2, whatever, right? You understand? But that is very bad, because you have in mind the sequence, but the reader does not. So if you suppose that you want to do something, like enumerate 5 phases or 5 dimensions, could be without numbering or with numbers, up to you, depends on the paper, depends on what you're doing. If you say, we split this issue in 5 items, and then you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put 1, 2 lines each, and then you say, I'm going to elaborate these 5 issues later on, and then you put 1 paragraph for each of the 5 or each of the 3, you understand what I'm saying? Then, for the reader, it's obvious. You just tell them, by the way, use enumeration, and you say, this is what I'm going to say. So use enumeration as a way to structure the entire subsection. So basically, the enumeration of the dashes is a very good way to give you for free a subsection facility without actually doing subsections. So you have something important. It's not important enough to make it to become a section or subsection, but it's very important. Maybe it's important because the technical detail, something important that you did. But it's not important to make a session, because the session is the general problem. The itemized part, the enumerate part, is fundamental because it allows you to give structure to the session. And by the way, let me tell you, this is exactly what most of you fail all the time. So you must be concentrate. So this is why, anytime I tell you, usually what I do, I tell you, please give me the course-grained structure of the paper, or I give you the index, more or less shaped up, and then tell you, give me the fine-grained structure of the paper. What does it mean to give me, I tell you, like in 1 week, in 3 days, come to me with a fine-grained structure of the paper. What is the fine-grained structure of the paper? It's a 1 page, 2 pages, where, however, not only put the right index, but for each section, put me 1 line or 2 lines, like a small title for each paragraph. Right? I'm going to talk this, I'm going to say this, I'm talking. Usually what you do, first of all, usually you don't go up, most of you don't go beyond 2. And usually you don't do this splitting. You just write some English. You just write the introduction of the paragraph. But this means you've not done the homework. This means that when you go to the paper, and since you have not have you don't have a fine-grained structure of the paper, this means that you're out of control. And the probability that you go your own way, the probability that you forget what you want to say to the reader is very high. You understand? And by the way, I'm not even saying that the fine-grained structure of the paper is final. What is important in this process? To get control of yourself. It's getting control of what you're saying. There is nothing wrong. I change the fine-grained structure of the paper all the time. But the key point is what I told you at the beginning. You must find a way to get out of yourself in the sense of getting in the mode where you're not saying what you want to say, but you're saying what the reader wants to read. You understand? So this I'm trying you to force. It's kind of giving like a reference point so that in any moment in time you call yourself to be in control. And of course, sometimes you have no idea. But then when you have no idea, the best way to be to come to me and discuss it. But clearly, if you really want, but you don't do it, almost none of you does. But clearly, when you fine-grained structure of the paper, you should have in a session at least 4 bullet points for paragraphs, right? You can have a subsession of 2/3 of a page. You can even go down to a subsession to half a page, but you can't go down to less than a page of the session. Otherwise, you go into the argument that you don't have anything to say, which means you just got the session wrong. Right? So in a sense, all this fine-grained and coarse-grained structure of the paper is kind of provides you a grid. And the idea of doing this is really the most important part of the synthesis. Then you have the poetry, you have the poem, you have like the style, whatever. But this is really fundamental. And it's not even clear that you can do at the beginning because maybe you're still very vague. Maybe you need to do an iteration, then refine. But if you're not in control of this process of getting full control of the index of the paper, then the probability that your paper will go its own way is very high. It's going to happen anyhow, as I said to me. I'm not pretending that I write all the papers correct, okay? And again, exactly as paragraphs are the structure of the session, the sentences are the structure of the paragraph, right? Right? We have the paper, we have the title, the session, the subsession. Now we have the body, and we have paragraph. And again, paragraph must be in control. So the key point here is that if you really wanted to write a paper, not only to get it accepted, but also to understand yourself, exactly like when you write code, when you write 1 line of code, when you write 1 line in a sentence, you must know, have in mind clearly the full picture, or at least you must have it clear what you don't have clear, right? The usual thing of knowing what you don't know, right? And sometimes you maybe end up saying, I can't write this paper. I don't know enough to say, right? I want to do the process, okay? So this is the process, right, of the paper, right? How we go for the process of the paper, this is fundamental. You see, 2, 2, 2, 3. Analyze the readers, defining goals, right? Remember what I did. So you start from there. Then you do coarse-grained, you do fine-grained, but you see the loops. Are you following? And sometimes the loops, what does it mean? It means that you iterate. This means you don't have the big picture clear. But some of you, most of us, not only you, always when you start a paper, you don't have clear in mind what you're doing. The process is not to do that, because that's part of life. The process is how much you're able to write the paper in a way to reify what was implicit in the analysis that we didn't realize. And this is actually how you learn the most. And when you do that, then you go into the fine-grained structure of the paper. Then you go feedback from friends, feedback from peer review. The feedback is fundamental. Why? Because giving a talk is important. This is why getting rejections is important. Because if you think about it, what is the feedback? The feedback is someone else who gives you feedback, but someone else is not you. So you take a paper, you give someone else, you tell, please tell me what you have understood. And if they say that you're not understood, you have a friendly wake-up call. You have a friendly wake-up call that you didn't explain well, right? So this is why you should, even the presentation, make your paper read by the others. You have to sure that, and they ask you questions, and they are friendly. They are friend of your. They should tell you everything which is wrong, not everything which is right. Of course, so everything which is right. They say can like it, but the key part is this process of making, refine the key ideas of your paper. So these from my, and then there's an issue of style. The style clearly is that there are a lot of issues of style. The font. Don't put black too many. I usually put black, a lot of black into project proposals. I don't put any black into the page. I think the reader may be pissed off by getting too much black, right? I always only italic. The English must be perfect. If you don't talk good English, you have to talk to native speakers. Drawings must be very clear. References must be very fundamental. Notation perfect. And you have to decide you want to do it. You may sometimes use the I and never you, we or neutral form. Neutral form is by far the best. But what I'm saying is that English, good English, no mistakes, nice pictures. Pictures must be readable. It's not that, oh, I don't have enough space, so I squeeze. No. Pictures must be readable. By the way, I didn't say anything about pictures, but pictures, graphs, are advanced forms of itemize. Anything which gives structure visually is important. So anytime you can use pictures. Someone said that one picture is worth 1,000 words. Let me tell you, it's worth 10,000 words, right? So you really have to use the pictures, which must be very clear. So, and by the way, as we say in the next example, the next lecture, the pictures inside sections are coarse-grained structure, not fine-grained structures, which is, as I've done with some of you, when you start writing the papers, you write the pictures first. And when you have the message to communicate, you just say what you're going to say. And the pictures are the best way to crystallize what you want to say, right? This is why they're coarse-grained structure, not fine-grained structure. Okay? I think this, is finished. To conclude, and then next time I'll give an example. We just analyze a paper of mine, and we find the mistakes I did in writing the paper. I think it was Wenny, Passerini, and others. Also the mistakes of the good things we did. This process of writing a paper, just much more than writing a paper, is the way for you to get really in control of what you understood. As I usually say, I said that at the beginning, and now I hope that I made clear, until you write the paper, your research is not finished. Until you write the paper, until you're able to write 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages, where you can defend your arguments in front of an audience, it's unlikely that you really understood what you've done, right? If you think about it, when you think of the fact that you never know everything, so the process of knowledge is a process of incremental growth, incremental understanding. Thank you, and see you next Wednesday.